Welcome to the nomadic autonomies of Transoxiana. This introductory tour will show you how the heartland of the Earth's largest continent, which used to be a part of the legendary Soviet Empire, has transformed during the second half of the 21st century. In just a few decades, it became one of the fastest developing, promising, enigmatic, and inviting regions of the world for all people as well as other inhabitants of this magic planet. The tour won't take long. Just remember how quickly the 21st century passed by. I don't know about you, but here in Transoxiana, it ended before we knew it. Transoxiana. It's an amazing land where natural and cultural landscapes are so complicated and intertwined that visitors have a difficult time figuring out where the real communities end and the imaginary ones begin. Visits to Transoxiana are growing in numbers every year as more and more people want to join the local tribes. It is impossible for the newcomers to distinguish between our artificial technogenic environments and natural ecosystems. On the outside, you can't tell what is what. Working inside our communities is the only way to understand what is happening here. Despite these difficulties, the autonomies of Transoxiana are known across the world, having become a symbol of hope for a new society that will replace the nation-states. It's hard to imagine that only 100 years ago this region was an uncharted territory on the cultural, political, and economic and tourist map of the world. The 5 independent Central Asian republics were born out of the Soviet Union's collapse at the end of the 20th century, and for the first 40 years of their existence, these authoritarian structures inertly rolled along, as if in a dream. During this time, a new generation had grown up, which gave the impulse of decolonization rather unexpected dimensions. The more conservative the empires of the past, Russia, China, the United States, and other great nations became, the more we wanted to break free from the shackles of economic and political dependence on world powers. More than anything, freedom from neocolonialism represents to us the liberation of thought and political imagination. The Turkestan crisis, a moment of dangerous escalation in Kazakhstan-Russian relations at the end of the 2020s, gave rise to a chain reaction of events whose consequences could not have been foreseen by experts. Analogous to the 4 East Asian tigers who led the Asian economic miracle in the mid of the 20th century, the social transformation of Central Asia became known as the social miracle, and later were classified by the scientific community as a phenomenon of evolutionary social singularity. It only took a few decades for the seemingly accidental process of spontaneous self-organization to reach a new level, the disintegration of the old plutocracy and the nation-state, followed by the emergence of hybrid, high-tech nature cultures. It was an unexpected and fantastic outcome. According to evolutionary scientists, such spikes in the degree of organization are called aromorphoses. In systems theory, this is referred to as emergence or phase transition. Us locals call it the nomadic autonomies of Transoxiana. In the early 2030s, ultra-right-wing nationalist parties came to power in most countries of the so-called Group of 20. Russia, Europe, the United States and Canada had effectively shut their borders to the immigrants. Due to the ongoing oil crisis, armed conflicts in the oil-bearing regions of the world were growing stronger. Kyrgyzstan remained the only democracy in Central Asia. Following several financial scandals and a massive public outcry, Kyrgyzstan introduced a system of e-government, in effect opening up public access to important financial information and to government decision-making. This was a prototype of the current inclusive hyper-parliaments of Transoxiana, the so-called e-Majlis, from electronic Majlis. An e-Majlis was termed a hyper-parliament because it lacks elected representatives. There are only citizens who communicate with one another through a computer interface that enables the interaction between tens and hundreds of thousands of participants. Simultaneously, the still authoritarian Kazakhstan was shaken by a succession of corruption scandals that exposed the role of the national bourgeois elite in shady investment schemes. As the country's external debt grew immensely, several Kazakh banks were on the verge of bankruptcy. To prevent the banks from going broke, the government tried to pass a law requiring monthly payments from every citizen for 10 years, which provoked an incredible wave of rage and resentment. The events bore a resemblance to the crisis in Iceland in the early 2010s. The country held a nationwide referendum and resolved to walk away from the debts and altogether ignore the financial obligations of local elites to the international bourgeoisie. Those responsible in the banking crisis were thrown in jail or fled the country, and the system of inclusive electronic hyper-parliament was introduced following the Kyrgyz example. A special international commission was formed in Bishkek and Astana, with Iceland active participation, aiming to facilitate anti-crisis consultations and exchange of expertise. As a result, a new constitution was crafted and adopted, enshrining the principles of inclusiveness, equality, and direct democracy. In the end, all countries in Central Asia resolved to walk away from their foreign debt, which resulted in harsh economic sanctions imposed by the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. Facing pressure from global capitalism, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan and Uzbekistan signed the historic Agreement on Resistance to Neocolonialism. The agreement was formulated by the Majlis of the four countries in cooperation with the Institute of Private Property Problems and the Institute of Virtual Realities. The document called for radical reforms in the sphere of ownership, property and legal capacity, as well as changes in the mechanism of public oversight and transparency. An important part of the agreement dealt with the creation of a new communal form of asset ownership. A new algorithm was developed, creating an accounting system for production and consumption for both industrial and natural components. The chief element in this system was an administrative unit of analysis named Electronic Mahalla, which was first introduced as a simulator of the traditional city neighborhood, the Mahalla. The abbreviation Ihalla quickly caught on and was widely adopted in the society. As a virtual reality for the distribution of resource flows, Ihalla simulates the processes of production, consumption and exchange in rural and urban biosynosis based on actual environmental, economic, biometrical and sociological data. Thus, households and businesses, labor groups and familial clans become linked with landscapes in the digital ecosystem. The community-based strategy of virtualization of economies was called neo-tribalism. With time, the Ihalla communities began to refer to themselves as tribes and selecting totems for themselves: animals, plants, or minerals. The organization of labor on the basis of scalable economic and ecological autonomies opened up entirely new possibilities for subjects of all levels, from freelancers and private households to farms, industrial zones, and state agencies. The first Ihallas developed as models of real city neighborhoods and rural districts, and were strictly tied to the places of residence of their participants. However, numerous improvements have taken place since then. It turned out that a virtual community does not necessarily have to represent a real-life district. Unlike traditional mahalla, an ihalla may be composed of anyone and include any number of components and territories, regardless of their actual location. Thanks to further improvements in the system, the now famous Taldykorgan Institute of Creolization recommended that the Central Asian governments consider the nomadic experience and implement the doctrine of translocality, abandoning the linkage of tribes to a physical place of residence. This innovation allowed individuals to join any tribe without physically going anywhere. Ihallas also opened doors to other countries. The decision was not made purely for economic considerations, but was necessary to eliminate the possibility of territorial conflicts, which would have remained had the tribes continued to be tied to their physical territories, as was always the case in history. This innovation was made possible through the development of inexpensive digital interfaces for animals, plants, soil, and inanimate objects. The interaction of Ihallas with natural objects was mostly robotic in nature. Over time, the changing diversity of translocal nature cultures has become the main distinguishing feature of Central Asia. The reorganization of people's lives along the lines of virtual economic and ecological communities resulted in a radical shift in self-identification and conceptualization of identities. Following all the chaotic crises and societal remodelings of the 21st century, it became obvious that we were facing an entirely new social tribal structure, which was termed neo-tribalism. Members of the Ihalla economies, representing a significant portion of residents of Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan and smaller parts of Uzbekistan and Tajikistan, were multilingual, fluent users of online computer networks and no longer identified with a nationality or a nation. Regardless of familial and ethnic histories, common identity-building features shifted to virtual tribes and their totems, as well as to the Central Asian region as a whole. In homage to the Bayaban movement's leaders, the region was dubbed Transoxiana after the Turkestan crisis. The word denotes ties to the global south and juvenile antiquity, juxtaposed against the north and capitalism. The name became so popular that on the 100th anniversary of Central Asian independence, it was adopted as the official name of the planned Union of Autonomies, bringing together some 300,000 subjects, each representing a virtual, landless Ihalla tribe. In 2095, the union was created, and Central Asian Confederacy of Ihalla tribes was officially named the Nomadic Autonomies of Transoxiana. Thanks to its openness, its mesmerizing hybridism in nature cultures, and its radical hospitality, today Transoxiana is a major draw for tourists, guests, businessmen, researchers, scientists, vacationers, migrants, and vagabond artists. Many choose to stay here for a long time. This country, with its direct democracy, virtual tribes, and ideology of self-constructivism, has become a mecca for opposition intellectuals and dissident movements from lands of repressive neoliberalism. In addition, it has become a world leader in hybrid nature culturalism. While the countries of the former West and their opponents in the former East fight for the remnants of mineral resources, the tribes of Transoxiana are rapidly developing far and wide in totally different, high-tech and even unintelligible directions. Nobody can tell what exactly is happening in this gigantic cyber-organic laboratory in the heartland of Eurasia, which is synthesizing fantastic self-organizing systems using artificial and natural components. Thousands of experimental labor groups are working here, bringing together some of the most diverse specialists and expertise from all over the world. Rather than being motivated by high salaries or career growth, or wasting their efforts on fierce competition, they have joined our tribes to be able to do what they love in a supportive environment. Transoxiana is one of the few places where such life is possible. Why don't you join in and be our guests too? But you've got to explore beyond this introduction and learn more about us first.